Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the New Bedford Whaling Museum's Portuguese Lusophone-world lecture series. My name is Emily Mead. I am Director of Philanthropy for the museum, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of our virtual guests this evening. The Portuguese Lusophone-world lecture series is an annual program series of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. It is underwritten by the Department of Portuguese and Brazilian Studies of Brown University, with support from FLOD, the Luso-American Foundation of Lisbon. We are grateful to Brown and the Department of Portuguese and Brazilian Studies and FLOD for sustaining this important lecture series at the museum. This year's series is also funded in part by many individual donors, as well as through sponsorships by the Ben Saud Hotels Collection, the Castello Group Real Estate, and the Madeiran Club, which brings us our beloved Feast of the Blessed Sacrament every summer. So thank you also to our sponsors. And of course, I also want to thank those of you who are museum members who are joining us this evening. The support of our more than 2,300 member households is what underpins every exhibition, public program, and school field trip that we do here at the museum. So thank you for your support. Members, of course, enjoy a number of benefits. If you are not yet a member, I hope you will consider becoming one. There are many benefits, including 50% off ticketed programs, such as this evening's program, free admission for a year, guest passes to share with family and friends, and exclusive access to member events, and of course, discounts in our gift shop. So you may visit whalingmuseum.org to join online. I encourage you to do so if you haven't already. Tonight, however, we are thrilled to have with us Professor Kenneth David Jackson. He is Professor of Luso-Brazilian Literatures and Cultures at Yale University, and we are delighted that he will be joining us tonight to speak about the Portuguese Burghers of Sri Lanka, a community that dates back to the 1600s. Professor Jackson has published books on Portuguese cultural influences spanning South Asia to Portugal to Brazil and beyond, including a book on Machado de Assis, who wrote one of my favorite novels, Epitaph for a Small Winter. So we are delighted that Professor Jackson's work has brought him into the New Bedford Whaling Museum community tonight. So please join me in welcoming Professor Kenneth David Jackson. We will be doing some Q&A. There will be question and answer opportunities. Please feel free to type into the chat your questions during Professor Jackson's talk, and know also that there will be a Q&A session at the end. So once again, please join me in welcoming Professor Kenneth David Jackson.
Good afternoon and greetings to everyone. I would like to begin by thanking the New Bedford Whaling Museum and Brown University for the kind invitation to speak to you today about descendants of the Portuguese on the east coast of Sri Lanka, who are known as Portuguese Burghers. This term is an official designation for racially mixed descendants of Portuguese, Dutch, and British over 4 centuries of colonial occupation. The Portuguese period, official dates are 1505 to 1658, then the Dutch from 1658 to 1796, and the British from 1796 to 1947. Here you see a map of Sri Lanka on the screen, and what I'll be talking about, the areas are Trincomalee and Batticaloa on the right, on the east coast. You'll be able to see the name of Trincomalee above the fold, and Batticaloa is more or less where the fold of the map is. The Dutch introduced this term, burghers, which was then retroactively applied to the pre-existing mixed race population of Portuguese, who were often derogatorily called Portuguese mechanics because of their manual trades, such as carpentry, smithing, tailoring, and shoemaking. They were generally said to be poorer, darker, and culturally different from the other burghers. But a strict separation between Dutch and Portuguese burghers would be hard to maintain for 2 main reasons. One being that women among the population of the Portuguese, who were taken by Dutch officers as wives when they took over in mid-17th century on their conquest of the island, spoke Portuguese Creole, and church records in Batticaloa from the 19th century document the continuing match of Dutch and Portuguese surnames, which is still the rule in Batticaloa, where we find Bartholots, Accards, Peters, along with de Limas and Rosadios. The Portuguese burghers spoke a local Creole Portuguese as a lingua franca, which was influenced by, the contact language was Tamil, which was widely used on the island, all over the island, well into the 20th century. And they practiced a local tradition of music and verse of Portuguese origin and African influence, which was the topic of my research. They have a flair for dancing, revelry, and bright costumes at parties, quote, where guests dance the cafedina and the chicote to the accompaniment of the viole, bandeirinha, violin, and tambourine while drinking a strong Arak punch. This description is from an 1894 study called The Music of the Mechanics of Ceylon by C.M. Fernando. The Portuguese built forts and established settlements beginning in 1624 in these two East Coast cities, Batticaloa and Trincomalee. There is some evidence of a Portuguese presence earlier, even in the 16th century, but it was the construction of forts that brought Portuguese sailors and soldiers, East Africans, and settlers. The adventurer João Ribeiro gives an account from the mid-17th century in his book, The Tragic History of Ceylon. This is to describe the fort at Batticaloa. Batticaloa was built on a point of land and protected by a bay capable of receiving ocean-going ships. It was a square structure with 4 bastions of ancient design, armed with a dozen iron cannon, and its garrison consisted of a captain and 50 soldiers, with a chief gunner, 20 settlers, a chaplain, a church, and a magazine of stores and ammunition. The fort at Trincomalee was a triangular fortress with 3 bastions carrying 10 iron cannon, built on a hill at a point of land adjoining the sea. A captain was in charge of it with 50 soldiers. There was also a chief gunner, 16 settlers, a chaplain, a church, and again, a magazine of stores and ammunitions. These forts remained in Portuguese hands only until May of 1638 and 1639, respectively, when the Dutch arrived. The Goan linguist Tavares de Melo describes the situation of the Portuguese burghers more toward the end of the 19th century as follows. It's fashionable in Ceylon for all the burghers, as they are called here, to have Dutch descendants, of whom, with rare exceptions, they don't possess the name, color, or even the language that no one here knows how to speak. All are using to the contrary at home, o Português baço, Creole Portuguese. However, they label a few hundred professionals as burghers or micos, mechanics, in general illiterate and black, who at times don't even have Portuguese given names. The term Portuguese itself is applied to the lowest social class, cobblers, and so forth. At Batticaloa, besides the forts, there are lagoons, which are known for singing fish that guide the local fishermen, who are said to use their oars to amplify the sounds of the underwater music. Mello also refers to the Creole music, which persisted along with language and religion, quote, to the cantigas that are called Portuguese, but which seem rather to be from Africans. For example, the cafedinha, the chicote, the bati-bati, etc., which are very popular, mainly among the Sinhalese and the burghers. C.M. Fernando's study that I mentioned, The Music of the Mechanics, contains prejudiced comments on the low social status of these artisans while describing the musical expression of their songs. And I'm going to show you a few images from the 19th century, which was their heyday, that show images of the Portuguese burghers. The quote on the mechanics is the following: "The cafedinha and the chicote of the mechanic display the peculiarities of the mechanic character, improvidence, at times amounting to recklessness, and the pursuit of pleasure at all costs." The words cafedina and chicote are often synonymously used, but the difference is marked between these two species of tunes. The chicote is always slow and stately, while the cafedina is faster and more boisterous, always in 6/8 time, with a peculiar jerky movement, the last note in the bar generally being emphasized. So C.M. Fernando further comments on the social significance and the practice of these musical dances. And here we see a couple dancing the cafedinha. They provide the occasion for dancing, which is dearly desired. The dance is performed in couples consisting of a lady and a gentleman. They stand apart on opposite sides of the room and dance toward each other in rhythmic steps, and exchange old-fashioned courtesies when they meet in the middle of the room. Grotesque attitudes and alert movements are indulged while dancing in the lively tunes of the cafarina, to the contrary. The slow measures of the chiconte call for stately and dignified steps. These dances are got up on very little provocation. A christening, a birthday, an anniversary of any kind is sufficient excuse, and often on a moonlit night, families unite to enjoy themselves at open-air picnics and listen to the violi and the bandeirinha being played. The burgher music was not only played in the villages. CM Fernando recounts that in the presence of the governor, he accompanied on the piano, quote, an orchestra of Ceylon Portuguese musicians, whom he had got together for the occasion, which consisted of 2 violins, 2 guitars, a tambourine, a triangle, and a bandeirinha. And here we see an image of these instruments. The Portuguese community of the East Coast in Batticaloa, which has now been organized into the Catholic Burgher Union, constitutes one of the largest groups of families to preserve their Creole language and music in this isolated city, the remnant of a culture that dominated the island society for hundreds of years. And here you see a group of the Portuguese Burghers of Batticaloa whom I met. Their occupations are still in the manual trades, such as fishing, welding, house construction, carpentering, and blacksmithing, and their economic status is low. Portuguese is the language of the family, the community, and church life, although most now also use Tamil and or Sinhalese, as well as Ceylon English. The records of the Burgher Union are taken down in Portuguese Creole, but written with Tamil characters, as are the church records. A linguist, Ian R. Smith, who lived for some time in Batticaloa, researching his project on Sri Lanka Creole Portuguese phonology among the East Coast burghers, cites statistics reporting somewhat over 2,000 burghers in the district and about 1,500 in Batticaloa town. All the burghers speak multiple languages. They're all bilingual, and they're an example of cultural assimilation. However, it's Portuguese Creole that largely maintains the group identity. And to quote Ian Smith, culturally, while maintaining its group distinctiveness, the burgher community has become largely assimilated to the matrix culture. The group is largely endogamous and functions as a caste-like unit. Cross-cousin marriages are traditionally highly valued. Group identity is furnished by dress, certain foods, customs associated with marriage, and of course, language. And to this list, we could add the songs, the cantigas that constitute their folklore, whose music, verses, and dance reinforce their group identity. During my visits to the East Coast, I was able to record some of the traditional burgher folkloric music and verses that promoted this identity and that are associated with special events and ceremonies, such as puberty ceremonies, birthdays, weddings, and so forth. This song performance presents more than just an identity, a worldview, while the verses have even more specific cultural ties to their social organization. The Batticaloa cantigas, sung in Creole, seem to confirm this interpretation of the cultural role of the folk song text. And here we have some musicians getting ready to perform. The main themes in these songs are sailing and travel, class, social condition, and race, satire and social criticism, romance, matchmaking, and proposal, love and marriage. They also have proverbs, riddles, and advice, and some are about the song itself. I published a book called Sing Without Shame, and the title was taken from the verse of one of the songs that I heard, which is the following in Creole: Canta nona, canta sem vergonha, or sing lady, sing without shame. And this is also found in one of the song invitations, which I liked as well, which is the following: Toma vida rabana nona, vamos nos cantar, pulsa cadeira nona diante sentar. Come pick up the drum, lady, let's sing. Pull up a chair, lady, and sit down with us. So performance of Creole verse by and within the group is what gives meaning to all of the celebrations, enactments, and renewals of community life, as shown in a slide with a young woman who's holding a pink bandeirinha from another community. So I want to concentrate on two examples of performance from the Burgher group. One of the best examples of interaction between music and ceremony is the wedding, which traditionally lasts from Thursday until Sunday when the marriage ceremony takes place. So on August 6, 1975, in Batticaloa, there was the marriage of Felicitas Seller, born in 1952, to Callistus Rogel, born in 1948, that included customs that harked to an earlier age. And here you see the church in Batticaloa and the wedding ceremony being conducted. In old-style weddings, which were at the bride's house, they erected a hall covered with palm fronds and white cloth, with mirrors behind the bride and groom. Over the mirror, they placed branches of tissue flowers, and in the middle of the hall, banana stalks with rotating open petal flowers from which fell rice and sweets. The fruit was later plucked by the bridegroom before he carried the bride to the chamber. He must also had to provide drinks for everyone present. And on the first day, the bride was responsible for feeding the guests, and the groom the liquor, followed by dancing. And here you see some scenes from the celebration after the Seller and Rogel wedding. The second day is for the bridegroom's lunch. Young boys of 18 and 19 and girls from 12 to 13 are taught to dance by their parents. It's an occasion for community matchmaking. And when the bride is dressed and leaves for church, she never re-enters the house because it's considered bad luck. In the Seller-Rogel wedding, the Mass on Sunday was at 5 p.m., followed by a picture at a local studio. And when the couple returned, music and motion were prescribed by tradition. The couple exchanged flowers and cakes to special tunes. They served others, and a melody initiated the dancing. The first square of the dance was the bride and groom facing the bridesmaid and best man. To the bride's right were her parents, or sister and husband, and to the groom's left are his parents, or a family couple. The dancing is done to the caferina and baila music. At night, the two sets of parents decide which couple is supposed to escort the bride and groom to their chamber. And in the morning, the tune Coranjanita is sung to awaken the couple, who must give cashew wine to all those who greet them, to a musical accompaniment, dancing, and the serving of cakes. The guests who remain at night take a break about noon, but they come back for another evening of caferina dances and singing of cantigas until about 1 or 2 in the morning after a supply of strong arak punch. So now we're going to hear an example of Coranjanita, which Okay. Now the second example that I'd like to present is from another Burgher community near Trincomalee. In Trincomalee, the musical style had been affected by a large British naval base, as heard in a genre called English Lancers. The Cafrinha quadrille and the Kaffir Lancers, however, possessed still the syncopated rhythm and the melodic vitality which had been seen before in the Burgher cantigas. And we're going to hear an example then of the Kaffir Lancers, and you'll be able to hear the syncopation and the difference from the song that you had just heard before. So let's hear an example now of the Cantigas Baila para Cantar.
grande alegria. Para Deus toma, Deus Maria. Para Deus toma, Deus Maria. Pois para nós que grande alegria. Mas a onda tá no dia, uma noite tá no dia. Onda não tem nada, uma alegria.
Okay, thank you. You'll be seeing an image of the violinist who played and of the people singing at this jungle Catholic shrine at a place called Paliutu, led by Father Theophilus Rago, born in 1937, who's a native speaker of East Coast Creole Portuguese. I attended a musical evening there of instrumental and vocal music featuring these cantigas, which one you just heard, and a cafrinha ensemble with dancing and singing involving the entire community. The musical ensemble consisted of the violinist Justin Paul, and he hadn't played in quite some years, so he said, but he had played at a British naval group, and he played beautifully, perfectly in tune, a wonderful violinist. He was born in 1914, so he was an older gentleman. The drum, or rabana, played by Raymond Johnson, born in 1935, and the triangle by Ivan Bartholot, who was born in 1941, and a guitar played by Emmanuel Paul, born in 1943. So Paul, who was a proficient violinist, had played in a local ensemble in Trincomalee, consisting of violin, English mandolin, triangle, tambourine, bandeirinha, guitar, and accordion. All members of the ensemble, which had disbanded in 1965, worked in the Navy. Paul's father and grandfather were also violinists. So these festivities began with a call to introduce the traditional tunes of the Cafrinha quadrille, the English lances, and the Kaffir lancers. And in the next example, you'll be able to hear some of the differences in melody, rhythm, and the dance steps of this group. So here's an example of the Trincomalee lances.
Oh, jingling on it, Ikerekaze. Oh, jingling on it, Ikerekaze. Casa no te porta no te que la lo pode. Oh, jingling on it, Ikerekaze. Casa no te porta no te que la lo pode.
All right. I think we got a little ahead of ourselves, but we'll go back and pick this one up. So the free improvisation in these dances involves 4 to 6 couples. The music is instrumental. However, in one point, people sing, and it's participatory. Each member of the group is given the chance to sing a cantiga with 4 lines, and there's no particular order, simply depending on whichever verse comes to mind, and singers can keep going any number of times as long as they have the energy. And you've heard just now one of the most famous tunes, which is called Singli Nona, a tune that is spread around Southeast Asia. And here's a description of it. Singli Nona can be considered to be one of the oldest traditional songs of the Portuguese Burghers, along with Papagaio Verde and Anela de Ouro, and the wedding song Cordanjanita. Singli Nona is sung in Creole in quatrains. It's rhymed to the accompaniment of violin, drum, and triangle, usually. It has a 2-against-3 rhythm and stresses syllables of the 2 words, like Singali Nona, Singali Nona. The word nona is the dona, describing the mestizo woman or young lady of European, African, and Asian origins who becomes the object of romance, courtship, and marriage usually by poor suitors without the means to propose. The Portuguese burgher, or so-called Singali Nona, or Sinhalese girl, describes features of a muse that would be repeated throughout the seaborne enclaves around Southeast Asia. She's compared to a tall jasmine flower, an alto margarino. Her lips are like coral, basso da coral. Her teeth are like small pearls, dente da aljofre. Her vision appears before the young admirer with eyes of ruby, ovo de rubinho, silver throat, garganta de prata, and ivory teeth, dente de marfilho. She is dark, tá trigado, and petite, nona pequenina, with a delicate waist, cinta delicado. Her hair is bound up with a knot with oil, mara conda grande. She's a fine dancer, bassa baile tem jeito, and is identified as a Portuguese damsel, nona meia donzala, nona Portugal. This song spread throughout the enclaves of Southeast Asia, such that variants have been collected in Malaysia and Indonesia, in Portuguese Creole, and in translation to Tamil and Malay. The song is still performed by the Portuguese community of Malacca, where it had been collected by Antonio da Silva Rego, a Jesuit priest there, around 1940. And here we have the main verse of Singlinona. Singlinona, eu quero casar. Porta ni quere, figa na mais dá. Sinhalese lady, I wish to marry. Your house I want not, your garden I want not, only your daughter give me. There's a manuscript that I studied in my book called the Hugh Neville Manuscript of Sri Lanka Creole Portuguese. It's in the British Library, dated 1890, and it has this in it. It's in my book, Sing Without Shame, and has the following stanza, which is slightly different of the same song. Singlinona, vi andalava, sava nutain, bolsa nutain, corpo rusa. Sinhalese girl, I saw you going to bathe without soap, without a bag, scrubbing your body. There's a recorded version of this song from Trincomalee on one of my CDs, the Cantigas do Silão, which is in a series that was produced for EXPO 98 called Journey of Sounds, or Viagem dos Sons, that was produced by Tradição in Portugal. So you've heard Singlinona, so we can go on from there. Being expressive of a burgher society, the song itself is no less a mixed import than the muse herself, who belongs to the mixed race communities that accompanied Portuguese coastal enclaves throughout the South Asian littoral. Its verses are in the style of Portuguese cantigas or love laments that were carried to Asia on the voyages through the oral tradition, coming perhaps from the cantigas de amigo, the medieval Portuguese cancioneiro. The young woman is allowed to speak on her own with satirical humor that may address taboo topics, including complaints about parents' vigilance, lack of agreement to their wedding matches. The verses tease and taunt the young woman with references to menstruation, to coquetry, to promiscuity. Nonetheless, in this song, the burgher muse is idealized, and the song foregrounds its main theme in the repeated first line, Singlinona, eu quero casar. Sinhalese woman, Sinhalese lady, I want to marry you. There is an interesting twist that one of my informants on the south coast of India insisted that this should not be Singalinona, but Chinglinona, meaning Chinese, because of the presence in previous centuries of Chinese voyagers on the coast. But for all purposes, now the song is sung with Singlinona, with the meaning of Sinhalese lady. So this song, Singlinona, became widely known, was considered a signature song of the Portuguese burgher community, emblematic of its cultural identity. Its rituals of love and courtship are evidence of the composition and function of its function in the local society. Its popularity and persistence spread much farther afield, which suggests that the nona, or Portuguese burgher muse, who is the subject of desire and courtship, established the norms of beauty and romance that were repeated and spread throughout the Portuguese maritime territories, including Goa and Macau, and that gained influence and acceptance over time in Asian societies themselves. Though this popular folk song and the description of its muse, the Eurasian African Sinhalese nona or lady, would become synonymous over time with South and Southeast Asian women in areas influenced by Indo-Portuguese maritime contacts, both etymologically and aesthetically. Through this, we see the enduring popularity of this composition and its relevance, even in today's versions. So the Portuguese burghers of Batticaloa and Sri Lanka, particularly in Batticaloa and Trincomalee, have kept up their musical traditions for almost 4 centuries. More recently, From 2017 to 19, Portuguese linguists from the University of Lisbon, headed by Hugo Cardoso, returned to the east coast of Sri Lanka for the, quote, Sri Lanka Portuguese Documentation Project, whose valuable collection of recordings and testimonials can now be found online. The recordings made by the project recapitulates. In fact, they re-encountered the same traditional tunes that I had recorded more than 40 years previously, performed now by another generation, the daughters and sons or granddaughters and grandsons of the ones I recorded. Although the documentation fortunately includes performances by elder members of the community who communicate to us their deep knowledge of their traditions. These new recordings take me back to the poetic moments, to the magic of the Batticaloa lagoons, to the Cellar Ragal wedding, to the songs that seem to come from another world to me, from a long-lasting adventure searching for the improbable or impossible remainder of a very old musical and linguistic world spread around the world by the Portuguese voyages, which now adds immensely to the world's cultural heritage. So I hope you've enjoyed finding out about the Portuguese Burghers and hearing about their music. The last slide is of a contemporary couple dancing the cafetina. And I want to end by saying what a terrific pleasure it's been for me to speak to you about this moment that meant so much in my research and discovering what I didn't know previously, the existence of these burghers and their amazing musical traditions. So thank you very much. Thanks to the museum, to the donors, and to all of you who've had the patience to listen to me. Thank you again.
Oops. Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Jackson. We are very grateful for this insight into what is clearly what appears to be a unique community. I know we will have some questions. There is time for some Q&A. If anyone would like to answer a question, you can either use the raise hand feature to be unmuted, or you can just type a question into the chat. And while we are waiting to see, give people a moment to actually get their questions typed, I actually wanted to ask Professor Jackson if this community, these communities in Sri Lanka are unique, or are there others elsewhere and around the globe like these that have survived in some form over the centuries?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. There were a number of linguists, mostly at the end of the 19th century and early part of the 20th, who traveled around the world to try to find speakers of different forms of Portuguese Creole. Sebastião Delgado, who was a Goan priest, was one who described different, quote, Portuguese dialects from different places. And his book on the Portuguese dialect of Ceylon from about 1906 is one of the most interesting. But he also described Creole dialects in a lot of enclaves and communities, particularly on the Coromandel coast of India and a few other islands. So one of the features of this Creole is that it did spread through the voyages to different geographical locations where the Portuguese had forts and had small communities. So they have a lot in common. So one of my experiences, I went to a Portuguese fort south of Mumbai at a place called Shaul, which is actually a very important fort in the 16th century. And I had met a native speaker of Portuguese Creole from this fort, and we traveled together to Daman, north of Mumbai, which was another important Portuguese community, a larger one. And he found that he could communicate very easily in the Creole with people from Daman. It was easily understandable. So I think that helped me to see that there were common features in all of the places where this Creole language had spread because of the ocean voyages. And we think of the term of the British historian C.R. Boxer of the Portuguese seaborne empire. So the empire carried around comparable materials to many different locations. So although there's variation in the Creoles in terms of the vocabulary because of the influence of contact languages and their locations, there's a lot of similarity as well, to the point where they are mutually understandable among some of the communities. And when I looked at the Portuguese dialect of Malacca, published by Silva Rego in the 1940s, and compared it to some of the materials from Sri Lanka, I was, of course, very happily surprised to find all the correspondences. So it helped me look up some of the origins and meaning of these verses and songs to find them in many different locations. But so yes, these materials are comparable across many different communities of the early Portuguese maritime world.
It's fascinating. The roots are strong.
Yes, the roots are strong.
I gather that there are some questions in the queue that where people can actually ask their own questions. Is that true, Beatrice?
Yes, that is. Beatrice is saying that is true, and I think we're going to invite. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing. Renuka to ask her question.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you because I am from Sri Lanka, and I am Sinhalese. So you got your Singalanona.
Yeah, Singalanona.
Yeah. So, that I just wanted to thank you and for bringing forward a aspect of my country that is not known to many people.
Well, thank you very much for speaking up. One of the things that impressed me when I was in Sri Lanka is how widely spread the Portuguese Creole had become. It was, in a way, a language for the whole island. And when the Dutch took over for their colonial period, church proceedings, legal proceedings, everything was conducted in Creole Portuguese. That was even the case of the early part of the British period. So although there were focal points of the Creole in these communities, such as Batticaloa and Trincomalee, it could be found spoken in many areas of the island. So it was a very influential cultural language on all of Sri Lanka up to the 20th century. And also the Burghers as a community, since of course the Portuguese had been to a certain extent lumped in with the Dutch Burghers, were given certain priorities in some of the positions in the civil service in Sri Lanka as well. So there was a very large Burgher presence, which was even notable to me the number of years ago when I was in Sri Lanka. So there is a very interesting story to the Burghers. There's an interesting book also by the sociologist Michael Roberts, who calls them people in between. I think that's a very interesting term as well. Fits the Creole so well because they're people who belong to so many different cultural traditions and whose language itself is a mixture, of course, of Portuguese, African, and local sources.
I think there's a question from Gloria Desa, I believe. If you can, Emily, can you unmute her? Gloria, are you there?
She's all set. Go ahead, Gloria.
I am. I wanted to thank everyone for this very interesting webinar. I knew that there were descendants of the Portuguese in Sri Lanka, but I didn't know a whole lot about them. And my question is whether or not the culture of the Portuguese Burghers of Sri Lanka has been marketed to tourists in a way similar to that of the Kristang of Malacca. If there is opportunity for them to showcase their dances, their music, their cuisine, or whether that is not happening.
That's a wonderful question. You know, when the Portuguese project from the University of Lisbon, Sri Lanka Portuguese Creole Documentation Project began, 3 linguists went to Batticaloa and Trincomalee off and on for 2 years, did many different recordings. And toward the end of this project, they invited a troupe of musicians and dancers to go to Portugal and perform in different places. And to a certain extent, this troupe and its composition reminds us of what had been done in Malacca which is to a certain extent not only the community identity, but the marketing of their own dress and dancing, not only to promote the community, to attract tourism as well. So I think with the troupe that was taken to Portugal, the Burghers got the idea that their culture could be presented in the same way. So I haven't seen any recent advertisements for tourists to visit the Portuguese Burghers in Trincomalee, but I have seen some recordings of the troops that now dress in a more recognizable Portuguese historical regional dress, and that must be for the purpose of presenting themselves as being Portuguese. What's in a way more interesting is that from the very beginning, if you were to ask a Portuguese burgher from Batticaloa, what are you? They would say immediately, oh, Portuguese, Portuguese. So even though historically there were very few actual Portuguese involved in the constructing of the community, the sense of identity with the language and music was so strong to the point of insisting that they were in fact Portuguese.
Well, that's very interesting, and I wonder if that's the way it will evolve in a trend similar to that of Malaccas. And I also wonder if what you think of that development, is it something that can be interpreted as a positive in the sense that it serves as a way to preserve the culture, or does it, I don't know if you can destroy culture. I suppose culture does evolve, only evolves.
No, I certainly see what you mean, that the over-commercialization can produce less than authentic form of dress and performance. And I myself prefer those recordings that have the old gentleman playing their original instruments and more in the style and setting that was perhaps more a 19th century setting. However, I recognize also that this is not only a small community, but economically disadvantaged community. And it's quite reasonable that they would need all the help that they could get to improve their quality of life. The other thing to keep in mind, that one of the reasons that this culture survived for so long was its isolation. These were port cities that were not well connected, either with communications or with transportation, to the rest of the island, which was in a way a protection. And I once asked one of the older members of the community what was the biggest danger that they faced. And at that time, it was the loudspeaker in the town square that would play popular music and discourage the local musicians from playing their traditional tunes. Then after that, all the young people wanted to immigrate to Colombo or to the large cities. So that I think that as long as these groups maintain the traditional melodies and perform their folklore in some fashion that's related to the historical continuity, that's really quite reasonable. With all the other changes that affect them, we couldn't expect them to maintain a historical purity of instruments and dress in 19th century fashion. I think it's quite reasonable that they modernize the performances and present themselves globally, because it is an attraction, and it is, as we were saying before with Emily, quite unique, even among all of the different Portuguese enclaves that we know about, the ones that are more commonly known.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Claudia, thank you.
I believe there's a question from Wilma Donka. Can he be unmuted?
Go ahead, Will, you're unmuted.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Emily. Professor Jackson, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation this evening. I appreciate it. Learned a lot. During the presentation, I noticed one of your photos, in particular, the one of the wedding. I'm not sure, and I apologize, I don't remember the exact date. I think you may have mentioned in the 60s or.
It was 1975.
Oh, 1975. In that picture, I happened to notice, a cross at the back of the facility there of the church.
Yes.
And my question to you is, do you know, through your research, if in a lot of places where there was Portuguese influence, especially in that part of the world, there was a strong connection between the island of Pico in the Azores, which has a huge connection to us with the Whaling Museum, and to yours
Yes.
truly, that's where my family is from.
Uh,
A huge connection between a lot of young men who would leave the island of Pico either through the church and ending up in many
Yes.
locations throughout the South Pacific and Indian Ocean. And I'm curious if that made its way to Sri Lanka, because I know in India and many other places that was the case, but I had not heard of Sri Lanka before, but it really makes me curious as to whether or not some folks from the island of Pico made it to Sri Lanka.
I wish I knew more about it to answer your question, but it is, of course, quite possible. And even through the spread of the creole, and it was an ocean world that was quite fluid. People from, as you said, from the Azores, from Pico, were coming to India, priests especially. So I wouldn't be surprised if there hadn't been some either a person or certainly influence of the creole, but I haven't read anything or know about a specific example of the contact in Sri Lanka from Pico, no.
Okay.
But here's a topic for someone to study. I'm sure that either close by or there is it could be a case of, particularly in the church, of a priest from Pico showing up in one of these seaborne communities.
Interesting.
Thank you for the idea.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for the presentation. Excellent.
Well, I have a question I'd like to pose. Today's burgers, what is their current status? You alluded earlier in your talk to there being in somewhat of a caste.
It's a small, yes.
And you also refer to the Portuguese as being viewed as mechanics.
Yes.
So what does that all mean?
Okay, so when I first went to Batticaloa, I met the head of the Burger Union in his, which is a tire shop. He worked with tires, and so it was like a garage to a certain extent. So I could see with that the so-called manual trades, blacksmithing, carpentry, house building, and so forth, were still the main activities of this group, and we could certainly call them economically disadvantaged. There was a tsunami in Sri Lanka in 2014, and I learned also that part of the burger group had moved out near the coast, which was disastrous because this group perished in the tsunami. So the group has had a lot of hardships, and it was never had a high economic profile in Batticaloa to begin with. That was the reality that I found. And then in contemporary terms, I think there's been progress, which is inevitable through the introduction of course, computer age, internet, and so forth, and the modernization of their presentation of their own culture. Of course, it's helped that now there's some interest in the group. The study from the University of Lisbon did a lot, I think, to promote recognition of the group. But within Sri Lanka, it's still a minuscule percentage of the population. The importance that the burghers had, let's say, certainly in the late 19th century, early 20th, has disappeared. So we could perhaps say that this is not only a unique culture, but to a large extent an endangered culture of a community that remains economically disadvantaged. And their main asset really is their cultural expression and their cultural background and history. So the more people who can get involved and interested right, in this music and dance background, the better. One of the interesting things about this music and verse that I found out, of course, the music has some African influence as well with all the syncopations. It also comes from Portuguese strophic guitar music to a large extent, but the verses, I found a lot of the verses in the collections from Leite de Vasconcelos of Portuguese folklore. So these are, this is older material that had been taken from Portugal on the voyage, and although it's become rather fragmented and mixed up, the basis for the lyrics, the verses, even the Singlinona verses, come from Portuguese folklore. So there is a definite, interesting connection there. That's one thing that can help maintain our interest in this unique community, and that they can possibly use in the future also to promote their own uniqueness and to improve their status. Certainly, we hope that that can happen.
Wonderful. I'll give the group a minute more to text something into the chat. I think we are just about to run up against time. But while we're waiting to see if there are any other questions bubble to the surface, I wanted to quickly, you referenced at one point in Batticaloa, in the lagoon, the singing fish. I just wonder if there's any biological basis for this, or if the singing fish were in fact the burgers, an excuse to sing and dance. Just out of curiosity.
Yes, isn't that interesting? So I think it's so curious, the singing fish. If you go online, you can find a lot of articles about these singing fish. Apparently they really do exist, or at least the fishermen think they sing. And I read they put their oars in the water to get the sensations of these singing fish. And you can even see a few examples of the fish that they pull out of the lagoon that supposedly have sung to them. But one of the most memorable times that I ever had was a full moon night over the Batticaloa lagoons, which are absolutely beautiful. And although I didn't hear the fish personally, they are said, to be a tradition there, the singing fish. So there must be something to it. What the nature of the song is, I'm not really sure, but the fishermen think they sing, and it's a long-standing tradition. So I suppose what we need are some scientists, acoustical engineers, to do an investigation. Although we wouldn't want to spoil the magic of the lagoons and the story of the singing fish.
Well, I for one, am going to choose to believe. I like it.
Me too. Yes, right.
So Gail, I'll turn it over to you if you have any additional questions, or just want to wrap up. It's been a wonderful talk.
I do not have any further questions, and I don't see anything more in the chat. So I guess we'll just thank you, Professor Jackson, for this talk. I think it's illuminated some things that most of us knew nothing about, and it'll pique our curiosity to investigate further. So once again, thank you.
And if someone wants to hear more of these songs, these CDs, the Cantigas of Ceylon, are available in this Journey of Sounds collection. I think it may be online now through the Tradição in Portugal. And there's a very interesting collection. So any musicians who want to practice on their own to play these songs are welcome to search them out and listen to them on the Journey of Sounds. But thank you so much. It was a real treat to be able to speak to you about this topic, which is one of my favorites and one that's meant the most to me over the years in the research that I've done. So thanks again for the opportunity to tell you something about it.
And thank you for coming. And with that, we will wrap it up. Good night.
Thank you all. Good night. Thank you, Professor Jackson.
Thank you.